record or? Yeah, we're recording. Oh, that's cute. That's right. So when was the last time that you read Kant?
Oh God, it's been probably 6 years, 7. It's been a really long time.
I haven't ever read Kant, but I've heard about Kant, and I know, like, I saw the little grid.
No.
I think we're okay for right now. Thank you, though. You can join in our conversation at Kant anytime you want. It's okay. Yeah. So I have some ideas, and I'm familiar with Hume, and I know that he's a reaction to it, but I don't really know, like, I can't just be, like, flat out, there's Kant.
Well, so what I remember about Kant is that he, like, the thing that I remember most is how fervently he wanted to argue, he just wanted the truth. You know, he was really trying to find the truth. And the poor guy, every time he tried to use his rational capabilities to seek that truth, he kept bumping up against their limits.
He was too in love with Hume.
Yeah, well, and he also, like, I remember when he totally deconstructed those 6 arguments in favor of the existence of God, or maybe there were 5, I don't remember, honestly.
That's impressive already.
Ansem wrote them, I remember that. And Kant basically said, this is all bullshit, and all that you're proving is the fact of existence, that existence exists, really.
You don't want to think about something that obviously has a need for something underneath of it, and so why aren't we talking about how to talk about that?
I don't know what you just said.
I mean, is that anywhere near it? Is that
pretty close? Yeah.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us what the heck that means? I mean, are you
right? I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I can say something about that.
Well, why don't
you?
Here,
I'm going to give this over to you.
We'll switch this.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, hello. We're here again. Oh man, no. Well, okay. So the story with Kant was that Kant. Part of the reason why Kant is so famous, at least sort of in his own thinking about what he has to offer, is he's a reaction to Hume's wrecking ball, his gigantic critique. Because basically what Hume had done is he had put us in this position, intellectually, philosophically, where everything that we had understood to be the foundations of truth, I mean, truth with big T truth, like truth.
So like the real way that things are.
Yeah, like the real way
we can't know that.
Yeah.
Sorry, too bad.
Well, or it's even worse than that, because it's not even just that we can't know it, it's that whatever it is that we would know is always something that's generated by virtue of the structure of our mind, for Hume.
Yeah.
And given that that's the case, even if it's right, it's still an illusion.
And we won't ever even know if it's right.
Right.
So it doesn't even, it's like it doesn't matter.
It ends
feels
up being,
like it.
Yeah, it ends up being this kind of meaningless thing. And the thing for Kant is that Kant reads this, and Kant's kind of interesting in the history of Western thought, because he, with a handful of people, and who's reading this in the 1760s and 1770s, understands what Hume's getting at. I mean, Hume wasn't really understood in his time. That was actually one of the things about it. It's not till later on that people actually begin to pay attention to Hume.
When was Hume again?
He was 1711 to 1776.
And then Kant was?
1724 to 1804.
So they were basically contemporaries.
They were basically contemporaries. Kant's a little younger than Hume, and Kant's writing later. Most of Kant's great works were written in the 1780s and 1790s. So he doesn't really... He's not corresponding with Hume, but he's very aware of Hume, and he really, really knows about it. And unlike everyone else, everyone knew Hume because Hume was a great guy. I mean, He was
really good at
He was the pub master, right?
That's why we talk about Hume in McMinimans, because Hume is a guy who knew how to party. Hume, I like to tell students...
Could Kant party?
No.
Oh.
Actually, Kant could have nice dinner conversations.
Okay, he was interesting.
He was an interesting person. He was, and he actually, apparently, this is one of the funny things about Kant, is that people report that, like, they'd go to these dinner parties with him, and he was this great guy, and he was so entertaining, and everyone loved him, and it was really nice, and then he writes books like this.
Yeah, like you're like, what the heck is he trying to say?
No, why is
it impossible to read?
It's ridiculous. It's just terrible.
What does the title even mean?
What does
that mean? I don't even know what prolegomena means.
Well, prolegomena, that's a good question. And a lot of people have been asking that for 200 and something odd years. But basically, I guess the issue is this, is that Kant is talking about a prologue to metaphysics. He's saying what needs to be said, what needs to be asserted before you can do any metaphysics in the future.
So he's basically saying, like, before we can even start to actually do metaphysics, whatever that is, by the way.
That's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about you need something underneath of something for something to exist. We got
to deal with these issues.
He talks
first.
about it better than I do.
Well, we got to deal with these issues first, and in order to be able to deal with these issues first, these issues that Hume has brought to our attention, what we got to do is we got to be clear on how it works. Because basically, what Hume's done from Kant's point of view is Hume said, look, everything that you've ever thought about with as metaphysics is an illusion.
Wait, so what's metaphysics still?
What metaphysics? Yeah, you were asking about this earlier. Well, metaphysics is a fancy term that was. It's got a long and storied and obscure history in philosophy, and basically what it is it's the study of the nature of being as being. The history, I can tell you the basic history of it. It goes back to Aristotle, and Aristotle had this idea. So this is like hundreds and hundreds of years before.
He was an old Greek dude, right?
He was an old Greek dude, 4th century BCE.
Really old.
He really old. And
I hear he's a bad dresser. He was the bad dresser, right?
No, he was a good dresser.
He had a lisp.
He had a lisp. He had a weak beard, and he wore gaudy clothing, according to this.
Well, gaudy means bad, but I think it's great.
Yeah, he was probably I'm sure he had Asperger's syndrome too. That's my opinion.
That sounds right.
But what Aristotle did was he had developed this methodology for being able to know about everything. So he developed ways of talking about being in terms of man as a social being. That's politics. Study of being as the good, that's ethics. Being as life, that's biology. Being as motion, that's physics. Did all these things, but then he asked this question, Aristotle did, of what is being as being. And the funny thing is, Aristotle actually never gave a name to this. He just called it the first philosophy. But it was the question of what is it that grounded everything? What is it that made everything possible? And it wasn't until after the death of Aristotle, like 200 years after the death of Aristotle, where a guy was editing through his stuff, a guy named Andronicus of Rhodes, and he said, and he had to figure out what to call this first philosophy that Aristotle had been talking about, where he was just talking about the nature of being as being. And he said, well, it's the work that seems to come after the physics, and the word for after or across in Greek is meta. So he said, I'm just going to call this chapter the Metaphysics, and it stuck. So the study the study of being as being in philosophy after Aristotle was just the Metaphysics.
Okay, I kind of felt like I knew something about philosophy, but now I have to clarify, because I thought I had an idea of it. But so the difference between metaphysics and ontology, ontology is what makes for the possibility of being, and then metaphysics is being as being?
Basically, no, that's a good question.
Sorry.
No, you shouldn't be. That's good. That's a good question. Basically, what it is that metaphysics really combines two things at once. Mm-hmm. It's, on one hand, there's a branch of metaphysics that's ontology, right? It's the study of... and ontology is the study of the nature of the real. So it's being in the sense of what it is to exist. It's the Greek word ontos. But there's a second branch too, and that's cosmology. Cosmology is the study of the cosmos, of the whole, the totality. So basically what you've got is metaphysics, two branches of metaphysics. Ontology, the nature of being. Cosmology, the nature of unity. And metaphysics is the reality of the unity of everything. How does all the particulars fit into the whole? What's the whole, and how does it hold into the particulars? Right?
Hard stuff.
That hard stuff.
Yeah, okay.
And that's what metaphysics does. And this is why Kant, who is looking at the history of all these philosophers coming down from time immemorial, recognizes that a lot of what they've been trying to do is really sort of hard to keep track of and not nearly as clear as they would like to think, because they had thought, and you got to keep in mind too, like Kant's background with this, in particular, he's looking at Descartes, and Descartes had given everybody this courage, this chutzpah, where they thought, you know what, reason is so sharp, it's so deep, it can get so far. We can look at this stuff. We can get into metaphysics. We can actually use reason and this radical doubt to break down to what can't be doubted, and then begin to use reason to build back up. And we really are doing metaphysics. We really are talking about ontology. We really are talking about cosmology. We really are talking about the way things really are, and we're getting at truth. That's what we're really doing.
But then Hume just tore all that down, right?
Hume tore that down because one of the things that Hume did, and again, this is part of the reason why Hume is so awesome and terrible at once. It was because
Awesomely terrible.
Or terribly
awesome.
And terribly awesome.
Yes.
He's both of these things. The reason why was because Hume just went through and asked a whole series of questions that had to do with how is it possible that we come to know what we know? How is it that we would come to establish and understand these metaphysical concepts that we know?
Where are these faculties of reason coming from?
Right.
Basically?
Right. Where are these not just where are these faculties of reason coming from? In a way, Locke had already gotten to that, who's important too, the empiricist. But also, what is it exactly that holds these faculties of reason, these assertions about metaphysics together, given these faculties of reason? And one of the things that you come up with Hume is this situation where when you try to talk about how it is that you would make a metaphysical assertion, the metaphysical assertion is always dependent upon these habits of thought. So it's not clear when you look at Hume whether you can ever do metaphysics at all. And it's not because he thinks, men think they're so great at these things, or what is it for us to try to ask these questions, or everything's someone's opinion.
It's just like, what's the point? Because we're not ever going to get anywhere close to it anyway.
It's not even that. It's that how could you possibly even put these ideas together in a way? How is it that you would be able to, given the way that human beings think, the way in which the mind assembles things, how would it be possible to make a metaphysical assertion? Any metaphysical assertion you say would be, by nature of its construction, an illusion. This is the problem.
But Kant really wants to, he wants to make that happen, right? Like, he wants to talk about metaphysics.
He absolutely does.
They're important to people.
They are absolutely important to people.
You think God's important to people?
I think that it's important to people who believe in God.
Well, God,
I think God is important, period.
And it's not. It is. I think that's Kant's feeling too. And metaphysics isn't just about God, although God's part of it. It's also the idea that in order for, basically it's this. It's that when we talk about metaphysics, it sounds a lot of times like we're talking about things that are really abstract and unimportant. I mean, like, people want to talk about metaphysics, and they when they have metaphysical conversations, they're at places like this and say, "Do you think there's really a God, or do you think there's really free will,
or you're on a third date?"
Yeah, or anything like that. You're all these things, these are all metaphysical questions, and they sound foolish and ridiculous and things like that. But the thing for Kant is they're not. And the reason that they're not is because it's not just because he liked asking the questions. It's because the way that Kant sort of tracks back in terms of thinking is that he recognizes that human beings, in order to think as human beings, they actually have to, they have to think metaphysically. I mean, you think about the things that you care about. You care about your relationships. You care about what you can hope for in life. You can care about truth. You can care about
God.
You can care about God. You can care about all of these things, and and when you care about these things, it's not like, oh no, I'm just curious. I mean, like, you care about them in the sense that you ground everything on them. Basically, what you care about is you care about truth, right? You care that there is a reality that is there that makes these things possible.
Yeah,
And if
we
you-
want to know things. I mean, that's just part of.
We want to know things, and we want to know that what we base that knowledge on is true. That's what we want to know. And not just want to know, we have to know. Like, we act as though that's the case. Well, this is what metaphysics is about. And if Hume is right, that these metaphysics that we've been basing all this stuff on is simply an illusion that's generated by the habits of our thinking, we are SOL, right? We got a problem. Because
Not everybody can be happy like him.
yeah,
about
right,
God.
right, exactly. I mean, it's
Yeah.
one of the miraculous things
It's
about
kind of depressing.
yeah. Well, it's one of the miraculous things about Hume is that Hume was able to do all this and to be able to think about all these things with this awareness of how limited these ideas were. He could truly be a happy skeptic, but Kant seems to recognize that people can't do that because they need to know what truth is, and they need to know what this truth is. That's actually why this prolegomena is not just a prolegomena to any future metaphysics, but it's a prolegomena to any future metaphysics as a science. Because it has to do, and this is the whole science part of it, is that science has to do with the capacity to establish an understanding.
So that doesn't sound like science the way that we usually talk about it. Like, when I think of science, I think of biology or physics.
Right, dudes in white lab coats and stuff.
Yeah, yes, but that doesn't sound like what you're talking about.
No,
here.
no.
Asian children.
No.
That was bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize.
It's accepted, but no. It has to do with it's science. It's from the Latin word scire, and it means to know. And what he tries to say with metaphysics is that if you're going to practice metaphysics, and you're going to practice metaphysics as a science, so you want to know about ontology, you want to know about cosmology, and you want to know it as a way of understanding, that means you have to develop some methodology where you can get through the limits of experience, the way David Hume has shown it to us, right, what these limits are, and get to a point where we actually know it, where we're not bound by the limits of what our mind knows.
So science is a way to transcend those limits, break through them?
Well, as far as knowledge itself, I mean, one of the things he says in this book is he doesn't go against the idea of metaphysics generally. He uses this word transcendence all the time. And when he talks about transcendence, he means, sort of crossing across. And he said, you can use...
Wait. What does crossing across is a little confusing.
Crossing over the limits of our thinking about things. So we can cross over the limits of our experience as an art, and we can begin to have this sense of awe, of wonder, of the mystical, and we can try to participate in that some way.
But he wants a science for it.
Yeah. And if he does that, that's doing transcendence as an art. And he says that there is a way in which we can think about sort of transcendental metaphysical questions as a religion, where we can just simply recognize that there is a truth and simply accept it and allow ourselves to try to receive it, not know it, not necessarily understand it, but simply obey it in some way. And you can do this in a religion, and all that's fine. He actually doesn't object to that. But what is really, really important for Kant is to recognize that is not knowing. That's not knowing. And you might say, well, of course it's not knowing. I already realize that. Everyone realizes that. No, they don't. Because even when they say they realize it, even they say, oh, no, we can't know God, we can't know truth, we can't know meaning. I mean, we have our own opinions and stuff like that. Yeah, fine, except they don't act like that. And they don't treat it like that.
And we
they
don't
treat
think about what it means.
No,
No.
You don't treat it like that. And that's the problem, right? You got to be able to treat this stuff as it fundamentally is. You have to be able to bring yourself to recognize what these metaphysical truths are that you're trying to go towards. So you have this question: can we get to metaphysics not as an art, not as a religion, not as some sort of practice, but actually as a science? Because that's actually how we treat it. And you have to take Hume's question seriously, not just towards religion, but towards epistemology, and from that, metaphysics generally. Can you actually know these things? Because it doesn't seem as though the mind can do it.
And so again, just to make sure I understand this correctly, metaphysics is knowing being as being.
It's
understanding being as being.
Understanding what being as being is.
Okay, and epistemology, that's got something to do with like just knowing itself, right?
That's the theory of knowledge. How do we know what we
And
know?
what was ontology again?
The study of reality. So what
Reality versus being.
right.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
specifically
All right.
it's existence, but yeah.
Existence.
Yeah. So there's
I feel like I should have known that a long time ago. I would like really feel that way.
yeah.
I'm kind of. I'll stop talking.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, so these are the things we have. So the prolegomena to any future metaphysics as a science is what has to be said, what has to be established within philosophical discourse if you're going to actually do metaphysics in the future as a way of knowing about the nature of reality. If you're going to do that, because basically Hume's thrown it down, right? That's what's happened. Hume has said, look, this is how knowing happens, and given this is how knowing happens, I can't see how metaphysics is anything other than an illusion or a habit. You help me. And Kant says, brother, I'm here to help, but I don't know if I can.
Hume said, "Go, mama."
And Kant said, brother. It's all family.
Yeah, it was very weird for white people to be
Well,
saying
that
back
was
then.
German, right? So it would be Bruder. Right?
Bruder, yes. Yeah, Bruder. And Kant was Scottish, so it was, I don't even know how to say that, but with a Gaelic accent. But anyway, this is what we have with this. Now, there's something that's brilliant about what Kant does with this too. It's the reason why Kant's important, because it wasn't just acknowledging that Hume had some really great insights. That was one thing he did, but it was that he thought that Hume had neglected something, and that's actually the little chart that I had drawn for you beforehand with this. Here,
Chart?
Yeah, the chart. This chart right here.
Wait,
I can't see the words clearly.
Oh,
Okay.
God. Back up, back
Your
up.
thumbs
back
on
up.
the.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your thumbs
Yeah,
on
you're on it now.
There we
Analytic. Oh, okay. Wait.
Okay.
It's not even yet. We don't need your face. It's okay. Just the
Okay.
chart. There
Okay.
we go. Okay. Chart.
Are we good?
Matters of
fact.
There we go.
in the
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay.
We
Remember
got
that?
it.
Remember
Yeah.
that? Okay.
Pausing. Wait, no. Write it down, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. So see the way this works, and this is part of the unfortunateness of Kant, is that Kant had to use these technical terms in order to begin to address these things. So let me remind you again what these things mean, right? So we have a priori. A priori means true prior to experience. So
So can I have an example of that?
yeah, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. That's
Okay.
that's an
So that's like basic logic kind of stuff.
Yeah, it not necessarily basic logic, although it almost amounts to that. It's basically things that, specifically, it's things that can be true, but don't need experience in order to be true. You don't have to experience A or B or C in order to know that if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. That's just an operation, right? That's all.
So that sounds kind of like mathematics could be something.
Well, this is going to be one of the tricks here. That's because that's dicey. Yes, it is, but in a very special way. So, a priori is true. It just means true prior to experience. It's prior, a priori. And a posteriori, as you can probably infer, is true after experience or through experience. So, the sky is blue, the grass is green. These are things that you need to experience blueness and greenness in order to.
Would that be like hot and cold too? Like
Yeah.
if I touch a stove, I don't know it's hot
Yeah,
until I touch it.
Right, that's right. And the thing is that these are meaningless. I'm going to put this down. These are meaningless statements if you don't have the experience of hot or cold. I mean, if you can't touch something, if you can't feel these senses and you can't measure them against one another, it doesn't make any sense. If I try to explain what the color red is to a blind person, I'm never going to be able to do it. I can make certain analogies to it, and I might even be able to make some kind of intellectual silhouette, but I can't ever really explain it because it's a posteriori. I have to talk about it in terms of the experience itself. That's what the truth of it is. So a priori, a posteriori. Now, analytic and synthetic, on the other hand, these have to do with propositions, right? and this is one of the unfortunate parts of this, but Kant's all about the tricky. An analytical proposition is a proposition in which
The chart, we can't really see at the same time. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Yes. An analytical proposition is a proposition in which the identity of the subject is contained within the identity of the predicate. Okay? And basically what the example that Kant gives for this
Wait. Subject, predicate.
Okay.
I think the example might help.
The example might help. But the example is all unmarried men are bachelors. Now you think about that, that's an assertion. It's a sentence. There's a subject in it. It's about unmarried men, right? That's the subject of the sentence. The predicate, the thing that describes the assertion, is bachelors. The identity of unmarried men and bachelors is identical. They're the same thing. When you have something like this, in which the identity of the subject, married men, is identical to the subject of the predicate, bachelors, you've got an analytical proposition. Now what can we say about this? Well, again, what we can say about this is basically what you have with Hume was talking about this. This is correct, but it's meaningless. It tells it's right, it's accurate, but it doesn't really actually explain anything about the nature of the world.
So, just to make sure I understand this correctly, that would be like saying all women are female, or all cats are feline, that kind of thing?
Actually, not all cats are feline. All felines. Are all cats feline? Yeah, never mind. All cats are feline. Excuse me.
Are all felines cats?
No, all cats are feline. Because there's some felines that aren't cats.
But all women are female.
Right.
Okay.
We'll stick to that example.
Yeah, and all men are male.
All men
there
are
we
male.
go. We can.
And all children are kids.
Right.
If you don't want to use the goat kind of colloquial.
Right.
I'm just obscuring things. Please.
Don't bring South
You don't
Park
do
into
it
this
as
at all.
bad as I do.
I'm
I'm
not bringing South Park into
No,
this.
you brought South Park into the side of this. But
I think it would be great if South Park was brought into it.
Well, we're working on that.
Okay.
But anyway,
So analytic doesn't tell us anything that really
no,
gets us anywhere.
Analytical propositions don't tell us anything. They only show us the necessity of a particular point of view, or not point of view of a proposition, of an assertion, right? And they're purely logical. They're always correct, but they're empty.
So
That-
Descartes would like them.
Descartes would like them, and he would, and any rationalist, anyone who sees an idea as being fundamentally a matter of necessary compositions, of necessary and sufficient reasons, is going to be satisfied with analytical propositions. The
It
problem,
doesn't tell us anything new.
it doesn't tell us anything new, and in order to do that, in order to actually have experience and have experience feed into our understanding, and this is where the rationalists, the empiricists got into all sorts of problems. In order to be able to do that, you have to be able to make synthetic propositions.
Yes.
Synthetic
chart.
propositions.
Synthetic. Yes.
Synthetic.
Uh-huh.
Synthetic propositions are propositions in which the identity of the predicate is not contained within the identity of the subject. So, I gave you the examples. The sky is blue, the grass is green. The reason why these are identical, or these are synthetic, is because blueness and skyness, or grassness and greenness, these aren't the same things, right? I'm telling you something about the nature of the sky or the grass by virtue of this. Now, those are obviously really, really simple examples. But you can see the importance of this is that everything that we come to know, we know through these propositions.
Yeah, so you could think of it like getting to know a person. I would never know that Seth is a philosopher, or that he has.
You never would.
Or that,
You might.
or that he's got a great sense of humor, for that matter. Before I had an experience with you and had some kind of a friendship or relationship, right?
Right.
So that could never be a priori, because I could never know that you had a great sense of humor prior to my experience and encounters with you, right?
Yeah.
But he is a man, so he is male.
Well,
Which is
that's
different.
obvious.
Right. That's a priori analytic.
Well, only when I'm dressing
Right?
on Fridays. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Boom.
I'm pretty sure that you're still a man and male.
Yeah. anyway, right here.
There we go.
So,
Focus, people.
but so one of the things that we end up with this is a situation where you have these four possibilities as far as these propositions go. So you've got analytic a priori, analytic a posteriori, synthetic a priori, synthetic a posteriori. These are, according to Kant, these are four different possibilities. Four different possibilities of the nature of propositions. And what Kant does in sort of responding to Hume is he says, well, what has Hume said as far as these possibilities go? And then from what these possibilities are, what does this mean for the nature of metaphysics? So he goes through and he looks at the two that he thinks Hume brought up. Relations of ideas, which he says are analytic a priori propositions. Propositions in which the identity of the predicate of the subject is contained within the predicate and are true prior to experience, relations of ideas. And then matters of fact, propositions in which the identity of the predicate is not contained within the identity of the subject, but is true only after experience. Relations of ideas, matters of fact. Now, according to Hume, that's all there was, right? There's either stuff that was in which the meaning was beyond doubt, but didn't involve experience.
And wasn't the relations of ideas dependent on the matters of fact?
No.
No?
No. Not at all.
Okay. I'm confused. Sorry.
Relations of ideas are the basic operations of the mind. They don't involve experience at all. That's why they're a priori.
Okay.
They're
Well,
true,
yeah.
Yeah, they're true prior to experience. They don't have any dimension of experience to it.
Well, when Hume talked about it, that's what I meant.
When
Yeah.
Hume talks about it, yeah. They don't involve experience. They're the conditions that are set down before experience is laid down. And that's why analytical propositions can be a priori, because analytical propositions, on one hand, you've got this identity between the two, but they don't need to have anything with it.
What would Hume's example of that be? I'm sorry.
Oh, he just thinks of basic maneuvers of the mind. He gives a syllogism: A equals B, B equals C.
Oh, that's right, the math stuff.
Right.
Okay.
What I had given before.
Okay, right. So a function is a relation of an idea, and then the matters of fact are the things that have the habit, right?
They end up being matters of habit.
Right.
Yeah. What happens is that Hume says that in order to have matters of fact, you have to have a connection between you have to be observing some idea. You have to be establishing some way of looking at the world. But in order to do that, you have to be able to have some way in which you think about how it is that these senses are related, but you need the experience in order for the senses to be related.
Okay, the chart makes a lot more sense to me now because I was a little.
Now, what
forgetful there.
Kant ends up doing is he asks, well, what about these other possibilities? What about analytic a posteriori propositions? What about synthetic a priori propositions? Because if metaphysics couldn't be analytic a priori, synthetic a posteriori, perhaps it could be in the other two. Well, he says...
They have to be exclusive?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if something's already in that box, then nothing else can be in that box?
No, you can bring other things in. He's just asking about where it is that you would put metaphysics within these things.
Oh, okay. Well, because of that, then metaphysics is excluded, because if it's a relation of an idea, then it couldn't include that because it has to be bigger.
Because he's talked about what relations of ideas are, and he's talked about what matters of fact are. Relations of ideas, it's not going to be metaphysics. It's not a way of talking about the nature of reality in terms of existence or cosmos. Matters of fact, not a way of talking about the truth of reality in terms of nature or cosmos, right?
So they are exclusive. Well, no. Okay. Metaphysics includes the other two.
Right.
But those two couldn't include metaphysics.
Right. Those two don't include metaphysics. So then, analytic a posteriori comes in. And analytic a posteriori says, well, what about that? Kant says, no, that's not even a real possibility of these things. And it's not a real, because the question of a posteriori isn't really even an issue. You don't experience analytical statements, right? I mean, so it doesn't make a difference. But this last one, synthetic a priori, right here, this becomes the interesting question.
It's got some potential.
It has some huge potential for metaphysics, because you got to think about what a synthetic a priori proposition is. A synthetic a priori proposition for Kant is a proposition which is true prior to experience. That's its a priori, right? It doesn't depend upon experience, but in which the predicate, whatever it is that's you're using to describe the proposition, is not identical with the subject. Now think about that. If you could do that, if you could make a proposition where it doesn't depend upon experience, but you're saying something new because what you're describing isn't the same as subject, you're actually talking about something that is sort of the grounding for what you need with truth. And why that's important, why he makes such a big deal about that, is he says, look, if we're going to do metaphysics, that's the path we're going to have to take. Here's what sort of the big thing is.
Okay.
If synthetic a priori propositions are possible, then maybe metaphysics is possible. Because metaphysics, as a science, metaphysics is something that aims towards what synthetic a priori propositions try to aim towards. All these others, they don't really have to do with it.
We're trying to explain something that
synthetic
exists before we experience it.
Right, but synthetic a priori propositions are things that are. It's not to say that all synthetic a priori propositions are metaphysical propositions. They're not, and that's important to realize. They're not. But if they're possible, then maybe metaphysics is possible. And what he ends up saying, what Kant ends up saying, is he says synthetic a priori propositions are possible, and he actually has an example of a synthetic a priori proposition. And the example that he gives is 7 plus 5 equals 12. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound like much of a proposition.
No duh.
And no duh. But he says, no, but think about what kind of proposition it is. He says, it's a priori. You don't have to experience 7-ness and 5-ness and go, oh, I was around 7-ness and I was around 5-ness and it brought about this 12-ness and it was intense. You don't have to do that, right? What you do is you take the properties of 7, the properties of 5, the properties of addition, and compute that to the property of 12. That's what you do, and you bring these things together. Now you might say, well, okay, I see how that's a priori, but I don't see why that's synthetic. But here's the thing that Kant says, and it's worth noting, there's a lot of philosophers who have disagreed with Kant about this since then. There's a lot of people who said that what he said wasn't really all that synthetic, it was analytic. But Kant said, well, you know, probably the thing is, it's in the operators, the arithmetic operators of this, that when you try to put 7 and 5 together, your mind has to assemble 7 and 5, and your mind has to have 7 and 5 equal 12. It's not as easy to see when you take 7 and 5, but if you try to take something like 936 plus 371, and you think about how you're going to add those together, and I have to add them together. I think it's 1347. I think.
Oh, for goodness sake!
But you have to put those things together, right, with your mind. You have to assemble them.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that there has to be the assembly there. There's your synthesis.
That actually makes a lot more sense to me, because the first thing that I thought of when you said 7 plus 5 is like, yeah, but isn't that dependent on experience? Because you learn about numbers because you saw 5, you saw 7, you learned in kindergarten that there was 5 blocks. But when you say a bigger number like that, it makes a way more sense to me that it would be before experience and descriptive of something. That.
Right. Yeah.
That
No.
helps.
And that's the thing. So it seems like for Kant then, that synthetic a priori propositions are possible. Now the big question then becomes, so what's that mean? So what?
Yeah,
So synthetic
big
a
deal.
priori propositions are possible. Well, what that means is that the path that you would use to get to this truth to get to this thing in itself, what he calls a noumenal reality, right? It's open. It's not. It doesn't mean you can get there. It doesn't mean metaphysics as a science is a reality, but it means that the sort of categorical destruction of that from Hume's point of view, it may not be open. The way I think about it sometimes is it seems like Hume was slamming the door on the very possibility of metaphysics and everything that goes with metaphysics, knowing about God and truth and meaning, and Kant, boom, he's putting his toe right in the door, and I guess having it's not quite slammed, right? Boom, right. That's Kant's toe.
So isn't it kind of like, I'm thinking about this a priori synthetic. It's kind of like asking what infinity plus infinity is, and that's infinity. And so Hume is like, well, we don't really have that concept, right? Like we can't approach that. But Kant is saying, but we understand that exists. And because we understand that it exists, we can at least explore it.
Well,
is it anything like that?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, I think.
I don't get it yet.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
I mean, the relation of that's maybe not the best example because.
Well, I just think of it as something that we know is there, but that we don't really understand it. It's a concept for it, but it's not something that anybody really has a grasp on. It's not that any of us will ever experience it. It's not possible because we have boundaries, like Hume was saying. But because we still grasp it, that it's there. And because it's there must be a way to at least begin to think about it.
Well, let's see how to approach this. I suppose there's the way I would see this is to say that there are mathematical ways to approach the idea of degrees of infinity, right? But and that these degrees of infinity don't necessarily have to do with experience. But that in itself isn't necessarily going to deal with Kant's problem because we still have some experience with what we mean by infinity. I mean, even if it's experiencing the concept of something always being beyond or an endless, a continuing set or something like that. What Kant, I think, really wants to know is, are we able to get beyond the limits of what it is to begin to think about the world in terms of experience? That's more of where he's beginning to approach this from. I don't want to get too wrapped up in the mathematical aspects of it.
Yeah.
It's more in that realm, and it's what he's laying down with this. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to this, but that's what the prolegomena is. He thinks that he set down the possibility of any future metaphysics, right? Or he set down, here's the things that we're going to need to explore if they're possible in order to establish if you can do metaphysics in the future. And if you can do that, well then maybe metaphysics as a science, not as an art, not as a religion, but as a science, maybe that can work.
I believe I can fly.
Right.
I believe I can touch the sky. Stop it.
Okay.
Press the red button again. That was